Hi, my name is Charles, and this is Great Britain Nostalgia. Here is something nobody tells you about your grandmother's kitchen. Half of what she cooked on a Tuesday afternoon would land her in serious trouble with the law today. Not because she was reckless, not because she was dangerous, but because somewhere between 1950 and now, the government decided that the food ordinary British families had eaten for centuries suddenly needed a license, a certificate, and a risk assessment form filled out in triplicate. These are 10 of those recipes, and I promise you every single one of them is absolutely delicious. Number 10, raw milk, straight from the doorstep. In the 1950s, the milkman delivered two things to the doorstep every morning: pasteurized milk in the familiar glass bottle and raw milk, also called green top milk, straight from the cow with nothing done to it whatsoever. Your nan chose the raw milk without a second thought. It was creamier, richer, and the top of the bottle was all fat that she skimmed off with a spoon for her morning porridge. Today in England and Wales, you can still buy raw milk, but only directly from a registered farm. You cannot sell it in shops. You cannot resell it. You cannot give it to a child under 1 year old without medical guidance. The Food Standards Agency recommends against it for the elderly, the pregnant, and the immunocompromised. The regulations around it fill several pages of government documentation. Your nan drank it every day from approximately 1940 to 1985 and lived to 91. The science around raw milk is genuinely contested, which I find fascinating. It contains beneficial bacteria, enzymes, and immunoglobulins that pasteurization destroys. Proponents argue it is a different food entirely from the processed version. Regulators argue the risk of listeria and E. coli is too significant to permit. Both sides have a point. What is beyond dispute is that a woman who grew up on raw milk, made her children drink raw milk, and served it to every visitor who crossed her threshold would face significant legal obstacles doing the same today. One glass, straight from the bottle, cold from the step. Nan never questioned it. Number 9, home distilled, elderflower spirit. Home brewing beer and wine is perfectly legal in Britain, has been since 1963. Your nan knew this and she took full advantage, lining her pantry with elderflower wine, damson gin, and slow vodka that she produced in industrial quantities every autumn. But there was something else in the back of that pantry, something in an unlabeled bottle that she poured into small glasses for visitors who had earned the privilege, something that smelled faintly of flowers and tasted like fire going down. Distilling spirits at home is illegal in the United Kingdom without an HMRC license, full stop. No exceptions for personal consumption, no allowance for small batches, no turning a blind eye. If you are a 70-year-old woman in a cottage in Herefordshire, the law prohibits the production of spirits by distillation without a license, and the penalties include unlimited fines and up to 2 years imprisonment. Your nan would have considered this the most ridiculous thing she had ever heard. She learned to distill from her own mother, who learned it during the war when certain things became temporarily unavailable through official channels. The equipment was modest: a copper pot, some tubing, a great deal of patience. The result was not particularly sophisticated by any standard, but it was hers, it was free, and it kept the cold out on a February evening better than anything you could buy at the off-license. She never sold it, she never boasted about it, she just made it quietly every year and never got caught. Number 8, hedgehog baked in clay. I will be honest, when I first came across this during my research, I was convinced it couldn't possibly be true. I had to go verify it myself, cross-referencing 3 separate sources before I accepted it was a genuine dish and not something invented to shock people on the internet. Hedgehog baked in clay was a real recipe, practiced across rural Britain and associated particularly with Romani traveller communities for centuries. The method was this: the hedgehog, once caught and cleaned, was packed entirely in wet clay or mud, placed into the embers of a fire, left for several hours until the clay hardened and cracked. When you broke the clay open, the spines came away with it, leaving clean cooked meat that people describe as rich, slightly gamey, and not unlike pork in texture. Your nan may or may not have made this. If she was from a rural background or had Romani heritage, there is a reasonable chance this appeared at a family gathering at some point before 1980. 19. The hedgehog was common in British countryside. The recipe required no equipment beyond a fire and some mud from the riverbank. Today, the hedgehog is a protected species under the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981. Killing, injuring, or taking a wild hedgehog without a license is a criminal offence. The fine can reach £5,000 per animal. The hedgehog population in Britain has declined by roughly a third since 2000. The law exists for very good reason, but your nan came from a world where what lived in the field was fair game for the pot, and nobody had thought to legislate otherwise. Number Number 7. Sparrow pie and potted songbirds. This is one of those things I find myself randomly thinking about at 2 in the morning. It just refuses to leave you once you have encountered it. Sparrow pie. It sounds like something from a nursery rhyme, which is precisely because it is from a nursery rhyme. 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie was not whimsy, it was a recipe. In the 16th and 17th centuries, songbirds appeared regularly on British tables. Sparrows, blackbirds, thrushes, fieldfares and starlings were caught in nets and traps, potted in butter or lard, baked into pies, and eaten as everyday food by families of all classes. By the early 20th century, this practice had largely died out in most of Britain, but not entirely. Rural families in parts of Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and the East Midlands still caught sparrows in their gardens and potted them in seasoned fat well into the 1940s and 50s. They were fiddly to prepare, small enough that you needed a dozen for a satisfying meal, but the flavour was reportedly intense and deeply savoury. The Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981 made all of this a criminal offence. It is now illegal to intentionally kill, injure, or take any wild bird in Britain. The list of protected species includes every common garden bird your grandmother might once have considered fair game. A person convicted of killing a protected bird can receive an unlimited fine and up to 6 months in custody. Nan's sparrow pie, eaten over a kitchen table in 1954, had a 2024 price tag of a criminal record and national newspaper coverage. The blackbirds in the garden are safe. Nan, frankly, would not have understood why we needed a law to tell us that. Pattern break 1. The law didn't come for Nan, it came for the rest of us. Here is something I want you to sit with for a moment, because I think it is the quietly important bit that most people skip past. None of the recipes on this list caused mass casualties. None of them triggered food poisoning epidemics or poisoned village wells. The people who ate them, the generation who grew up on raw milk and foraged mushrooms and home-distilled elderflower spirit, are in many cases still alive, clear-eyed and sharp, contradicting every food safety briefing their grandchildren can find online. The laws that made these recipes illegal were not written in response to disaster. Most of them were written in response to scale. As Britain's food supply moved from local and personal to industrial and anonymous, regulators needed rules that worked at a factory level. Rules designed for a facility producing 10,000 portions a day were then applied retroactively to the woman with a copper pot in her back kitchen. Your Nan was not the problem the law was trying to solve. She just happened to be standing in the way when the legislation arrived. Number 6. Real Scottish haggis with sheep lung. If you ask a Scottish person what makes authentic haggis authentic, they will tell you it is the lung. Sheep heart, liver and lung, minced with oatmeal, onion, suet and spices, packed into a stomach and simmered for several hours. That was the recipe. That was the dish Robert Burns wrote poetry about in 1788. That was what your Scottish grandmother served every Burns night without apology or modification. The lung is now the problem. Under European food safety regulations adopted into UK law, the sale of lungs from slaughtered animals for human consumption has been restricted or prohibited. The specific issue is the risk of stomach contents entering the lung during slaughter. A modern commercial haggis sold in British supermarkets does not contain lung. It has not for decades, which means the haggis on every Burns night table in Britain today is, by the strict definition of tradition, not actually haggis. In the United States, haggis containing lung has been banned outright since 1971. In Canada, the same. Traditional haggis cannot be legally imported into North America. Scottish expatriates have been campaigning for decades to have the ban reversed. Your Nan made the real thing in a pot on the stove and served it with neeps and tatties and a dram of something that was not from any registered distillery. She would have found the modern version thoroughly disappointing, and she would have been right. Number 5. Unpasteurized home cheese. Sold at the door in almost every village across Britain, there was a woman who made cheese. A house cow, a small flock of goats, and decades of quiet expertise. No shop, no middleman, no label beyond her own name, just hard and soft cheeses sold from the kitchen door. This was how British cheese had been made for 1,000 years. The flavor changed with the seasons, with what the animals were eating. Those variations were not flaws, they were the point. Today, selling homemade cheese requires local authority registration, hygiene compliance, premises certification, and additional restrictions if the milk is unpasteurized. I actually visited a small dairy farm in Somerset 2 years ago, where an elderly woman had been making unpasteurized cheddar for 40 years. She declined to discuss her licensing situation. I respected that entirely. What she made was extraordinary. The gap between what regulations permit and what actually tastes good is sometimes very wide indeed. indeed. Number 4. Roadkill rabbit stew. The hedgerows of rural Britain were not just scenery to your grandmother. They were a larder, and nothing that came out of those hedgerows went to waste, including the rabbit that had the misfortune of crossing the road at the wrong moment. Roadkill cooking is technically legal in Britain under certain circumstances, but the rules are complicated, inconsistently applied, and in some cases contradict each other depending on the species involved in the location. For rabbits, deer, pheasant, and certain other animals, collecting fresh roadkill for personal consumption is generally tolerated, though it is not explicitly protected by law. The driver of the vehicle that killed the animal cannot legally collect it. Only someone coming along afterwards can. This distinction is real and entirely absurd, but there it is. Nan did not know about this distinction. Nan saw a fresh rabbit at the roadside on her way back from market and made a stew. She had been doing exactly this since approximately 1938 and considered it not merely legal but morally obligatory. The stew was braised in stock with onion, carrot, a bundle of thyme from the garden, and a glass of something from the unlabeled bottle at the back of the pantry. She served it with bread she had made that morning. It cost nothing beyond the time it took to prepare, and it was magnificent. Pattern break 2. What Nan knew that the Food Standards Agency forgot your Nan understood something about food that we have systematically engineered out of modern eating. She understood provenance, not in the way the gastropub menus use the word with a little story about a named farmer and a photograph of rolling hills on the back of the menu. She understood it in the actual sense. She knew exactly where everything came from, because in most cases she had grown it, collected it, or prepared it herself from an animal whose history she could trace personally. That knowledge produced a relationship with food that no food hygiene certificate can replicate, and no supermarket supply chain can manufacture. It also meant she could make judgments about safety and quality that were informed by genuine expertise rather than regulatory compliance. She did not need a use-by date. She knew by looking, by smell, by the feel of the thing in her hand. We replaced that expertise with labeling. We replaced her judgment with our regulations, and somewhere in that exchange, we lost something we have not quite figured out how to get back. Number 3. Home-cured ham sold neighbor to neighbor. Every autumn, certain smells announced themselves across Britain's villages and terraces. Coal smoke, fallen leaves, and hanging meat. The pig was an event. Families who kept a pig through the year had it slaughtered in October or November. The cured ham was buried in salt for weeks, rubbed with dark sugar, black pepper, and juniper berries, then hung in muslin from the kitchen ceiling to dry. After 6 weeks of curing, what emerged had extraordinary depth and flavor. She sliced it for sandwiches, carved it at Christmas, and sold joints to neighbors for a few shillings. That last part is where the law intervenes. Selling homemade cured meat now requires food business registration, HACCP compliance, and an environmental health inspection. The regulations exist for genuine reasons. Nan's ham never went badly wrong. It was, by all accounts, the finest thing anyone on her street had ever eaten. The neighbor 2 doors down reportedly wept the year there was no ham at Christmas. I find that detail more moving than I probably should. Number 2. Wild mushroom foraging from protected and private land. I went down such a deep rabbit hole on the legal history of foraging in Britain that my wife had to physically take my laptop away from me at midnight. I'm not exaggerating. The law in this area is genuinely fascinating and deeply strange. Under the Theft Act of 1968, picking wild mushrooms from land you do not own is technically theft if done for commercial purposes, but is generally tolerated for personal consumption under the right to roam provisions that developed over subsequent decades. However, the Countryside and Rights of Way Act of 2000 introduced restrictions on foraging in designated areas, sites of special scientific interest, national nature reserves, and certain protected habitats have outright prohibitions on any foraging whatsoever. The penalties can include fines and criminal charges. Your Nan foraged for mushrooms in fields and woodland that she had no legal right to enter, collected whatever she found without asking permission, and brought them home to fry and butter with salt and serve on toast. She did this every autumn from roughly 1930 to her mid-70s. She never once considered that she might be breaking the law, because when she started doing it, those laws did not exist. The mushrooms she collected included ceps, chanterelles, field mushrooms, and the occasional hedgehog mushroom. which is not a hedgehog, but a fungus that resembles one and which tastes extraordinary with eggs. She knew which ones were safe because her mother had taught her, and her mother had been taught by hers. That knowledge goes back further than any piece of legislation. Number 1. Homemade sloe gin sold over the garden fence. This is the one that ties everything together, and I personally think it is the most underrated part of the whole story. Every other recipe on this list is something Nan made, kept, and used. The sloe gin is different. The sloe gin is where she crossed from cook to merchant. Making it is legal. Pick sloes from the blackthorn hedge in October. Pack them into a jar with sugar and gin. Leave it 3 months in a dark cupboard. What comes out is a dark, ruby liqueur, tasting of autumn and plum, and something you cannot quite name. Nan made it every year in quantity, and she sold it over the garden fence at the church bazaar. Plain bottles with a handwritten note. She had a waiting list. Selling it without an HMRC license is illegal. Nan did it for 40 years anyway. She was never once cautioned. She was simply beloved. So there they are. 10 recipes your Nan made every week that would earn her a visit from the authorities today. None of them killed anyone. Several of them were extraordinary.
All of them are illegal now, or restricted, or buried under regulations written for a world that bears very little resemblance to the one Nan actually lived in. Here is my challenge to you this week. Make the sloe gin. It is October as I write this. The hedgerows are full, and you are perfectly within your rights to make it for your own consumption. Make a jar. Leave it in the cupboard. Open it at Christmas. Do not sell it over the fence. I cannot tell you to do that. But if your neighbor happens to leave a bottle of something ruby colored on your doorstep with a handwritten note, I think you should probably accept it with gratitude. I am Charles. This is Great Britain Nostalgia.
Tell me in the comments which one surprised you most. I already have a guess.